So hi, so hi guys, welcome to episode 2 of Boys Talk. This is going to be Communication 101. It's going to be a little episode of this kind of podcast talk show thing that myself, SeaKnightofEa, and BlackKnight Boys BlackKnight as well, are doing here. We've got a few things to talk about, but primarily what we want to be talking about here is communication and the way we talk to each other about the game. This isn't necessarily a conversation about how we talk when we're in game, how we flame each other and bash each other and say GG easy and call each other noobs, but it's a general conversation about the language that we use when we talk about the game, and specifically about the development of the game and issues and grievances that we have with the balance or the general matchup. So do you guys want to introduce yourselves before we get started?
I am the SeaKnightofEa.
And I am the BlackKnight.
The heroes themselves. Before we start, it's a quick one. Obviously, it's very important now. We have a new tool available for the game, Battle for Middle-earth 2 Rise of the Witch King. It's Rise of the Witch King League. You can now sign up at riseofthewitchking-league.net, and the new 8.4 patch comes with a league reporter tool, which means that we can now report all our games to a new ladder, and it's an ELO ladder. So for those of you who are aware of the 2.01 quick match, the way that worked, this is very similar. So if I go now onto ladders individual, the current number 1 ranked player in the game is Imperialist. He's got an 1884 ELO with 37 wins, 5 losses in 1v1. It's also a team ladder. There's a monthly individual, monthly team. And on top of that, all of the games that you play on Rise of the Witch King League, they are now reported automatically by the loser, so it's a much better alternative to Clan Wars, but all of the replays are available. So I can go into recent games and look at the last 10 played games. I can make it the last 100. There's been 1,013 games played in less than a month. And I can go into any of I've got Asba, so that's versus me. I've got Andy San versus Papa Smurf. I can download that replay immediately and go and watch it. So I can go and watch any of these guys, and I think that not only is this going to be good for individual development, this now gives the development team and us as a community hard data. This gives us the ability to look at matchups, specific matchups, what players winning what the average win percent in 1v1. So currently Men of the West have a 56 win percentage in 1v1 excluding mirrors. The worst is draws with 40%. The second worst is elves with 46%. But we've got all this hard data now, which will help us develop the game and get to a better point for balance.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, one of the biggest useful things that I'm able to look at certain matchups almost when I can. Like, for an example, for me, I was looking up Eisen versus Goblin matchups, and I was looking at people's build orders and things like that. And this kind of helped me because an example is that I saw DJ Premier do a certain build order that I haven't done before, and I actually kind of talked to him. I'm like, hey, I watched this replay, I saw that build order, and I thought it was good. Just kind of a reference. And we kind of chatted more so. I rambled, and he just responded. But you're able to kind of interact with the community because of the replays that you have now, because they're not designed to be entertaining. They're just the recorded replays for a league. So you would be able to see stomps, you would be able to see close games, like all the games in between, which is a far more useful tool than the kind of like game replay section where a lot of people like to tailor their replays instead of just posting them regardless of what happened in it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And other great things about it, you've talked about how all replays are now accessible, and you can often learn something from a stomp if you're a learning player. But if you're uploading replays onto GameReplays.org or any other site, like, you're only going to upload the ones that you, as the player, find value in. But spectators can often find value in things that the players don't. And another thing that's really useful about it is that now it gives us a metric with which to accurately measure ourselves. And for those of you who are maybe a little bit trepidatious, you think, oh, it's a ladder, oh, it's elo. Like I'm just playing for fun. I don't really want it to be this competitive thing. I don't want to take my matches that seriously. You should still play League, because it doesn't have to inherently be super competitive, but it is incredibly useful to know where you stand within the community. Because if you go on to Game Ranger at any given time on any given Sunday, you see endless amounts of room with really useless titles like 2v2, Buckland, no elves, medium players only. What, my friends, does medium player only mean? I don't know. It's entirely arbitrary and relative to what that person's interpretation of his own skill level is. Basically, people are saying, I want to play a game around my skill level because I want it to be interesting and I don't want to bash or get bashed. Well, now, okay, maybe you don't want to grind out and try and get first place or whatever, but if you know that you're 1500 elo, instead of putting something useless in your name, in your game title, like medium players only, you can say 1400 to 1600 players only, please. And then you can check and you can see if this person is a smurf. Like, this is very useful. And the data from your games, from the games at every level, is useful for to gather stats from for the people that are actively balancing the game.
That's a really good point, is that this has, not only does it have an individual ladder which you can check on a browser, it also has a list of every single registered player, so you can check if every single player in your room is registered on Rise of the Witch King League. And what we really want the community to push for, and what we're trying to push for as individual players, is for every single game to be played on League as standard. Every single game to be ranked. Now, it doesn't mean it's competitive. It doesn't mean, who cares? The current last place in the individual ladder has 1424 elo. That person has 3 wins and 24 losses. But that person...
And he's a hero.
He's a hero. He's a better player for playing Rise of the... People are like, oh, I don't want to play League. Why not? This person has a number next to their name that says, oh, when I'm looking for a fair game, I know that if someone joins my game and their elo is 1757, like DJ Premier, okay, they know that DJ Premier is already a good player. But once you get out of the top 10, you get players like, Grievin, For Gondor, Centurion, who's made Shadowfax, all of these guys that maybe you aren't aware of. But it doesn't make a difference, because now you've got a number next to their name, and you can say, well, listen, I think you're too high level. We want elo 1400 to 1600. And you're going to improve more by having that nicer selection. Every single person on Game Replays in a room has either good players only, medium players, or noob/med. And when you ask people, and I've been doing it for the past few weeks, what rank are you guys? What do you rank yourselves as? Everyone says medium. It doesn't mean anything. What is that? And I'm like, then I go and I beat them. Sometimes I lose against them. And I go, well, there's a huge gulf here. And now we have a real, fantastic, hard, empirical data. A great way to be able to balance the game more, generally speaking, and to balance your matches more so that you're enjoying the game. No one wants to get stomped. Don't go against the Imperialist. He's 1884, and you can see that, and he'll kill you in a 1v1. But you can go, oh, wait a minute. I've got a guy here, Bao Bao. He's 1540, and I'm 1480. That feels nice,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
The other good thing though about it is that, say you are a player like me who's rated quite poorly, but you enjoy learning about the game, you enjoy playing matches. You can still play players that are highly rated for you, and the system is weighted. So say you are that 1400 player, and you play against Imperialists, and you manage and you lose to them, as you probably will. The system accounts for it. And if you do manage to beat them, well, you're going to get a whole bunch of points. And it. But one of the major complaints that you hear from players in Game Ranger lobbies, if you get into a team game or anything, is you sit around, you wait for 8 people to join your lobby, 6 people to join your lobby, you get into it, and people immediately start complaining because they think the teams aren't fair. Because all anybody wants is to be able to get into a game and have some nice back and forth action where one team doesn't just get rolled over, because that's where a lot of joy is found. It's like, listen, if you want to get better at this game, play everybody. But if that even experience is what you're looking for, you have no reason not to play League.
It's absolutely true. We just played, myself and BlackKnight, just played a 3v3, and at the end of it, one of the enemy team, I think unfairly personally, said this isn't a balanced game. Now, what we could have done if every single person was signed up to League is we could have said in the game, well, we want 1,500 to 1,700 ELO players. And then when everyone joins, we check it very quickly using Control and F on the individual ladder with everyone's name, because most people are going to use their Game Ranger name as their in-game nickname. You can always ask them if it isn't on there. You can straight away see, well, wait a minute, yeah, everyone's pretty fairly ranked here for an ELO. And maybe still there will be games which someone rolls someone over. But that still happens in top-rated 1v1s. Someone has a bad start or whatever. But it means that you are much more likely to get a much better game. So someone in the chat asked, I don't understand the ranking system. So it's an ELO system, Crip. So it's just like chess, or it's just like League of Legends. The more games you play, if you win, you get points. If you lose points. But if you are low-rated ELO, and you go against someone on the high-rated ELO, the system accounts for that. It isn't going to give you minus 20 points to your ELO because you lost against Imperialist. It might even give you points, or take away very few for losing, because it knows that you're against someone who's very good. And what you're going to get, especially as the time goes on, because you have a month-to-month ranking and then an overall worldwide forever ranking, is you're going to get players settling in to their ELO. And you're going to get people trying to get higher and higher. And eventually, we might even start segmenting these ELOs and putting them into ranks. So 1,400 to 1,500 might be silver. 15 to 16 might be bronze. That kind of thing. And you can say bronze players or whatever. And you're going to get a better game out of it. So even if you are not great at this game and you're embarrassed or you're worried about losing and getting noob stomped and having your record there for all to see, it doesn't matter. Your experience, I guarantee you, will improve by using the League system. We should all try to be using it as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And now, just as like a minor caveat before we move on, if you play this game and you want to play 3v3 and 4v4, you want to play team games and you want them to be even, which I think is the majority of the player populace, you should play League, and we have explained why. But we are not saying that you should avoid playing better opponents, because if and this comes down to what is your goal when playing. If your only goal is you want to have fun, you want to play with people, you want to play in a big game where you're more likely to be able to get Aragorn and Gandalf and the fun toys that you like to play with, you should still use the League system. You should still play these games. That if I just described you with that sentence, this is what this entire segment has been directed towards. But if you're a competitive player, if the joy that you get out of playing this game is improving as a player, seeing other people improve and trying to push your own limits, then you 100%. Now you'll have the ability to find matches that might be a good practice partner for you, but you still have the opportunity to play better players, to lose to them, and to improve. And we need both. But yeah,
absolutely. I think you make a big point there that I think a lot of what would be described by some as casual players, guys who like to play the 4v4s and the 3v3s, and as you say, get out Gandalf and Aragorn, all the toys, and maybe get Army of the Dead, because they'll never get it in a 1v1, because it's more difficult to get those big power points to play those big games. You guys should still be playing League, and you shouldn't be dodging games against players that you might see on the enemy team as out of your ELO, because that is a separate game mode. There is a team ranking. We have an individual ladder and we have a team ladder. So if you go to the team ladder right now, I am 50th on the team ladder with 1604 ELO. I've got 13 wins and 13 losses. But if you go to the individual ladder, I am 87th with 1580 with 3 wins, 4 losses. But they're two different rankings and they're two different numbers. And you shouldn't put too much weight onto them in terms of like, well, I don't want to lose, so I don't want to play players with big numbers. It's still going to be a fun game, and you're still going to be able to have a decent match, and your ELO won't suffer for it because it is a weighted system, even in those 4v4s.
Yeah.
And I think that leads us nicely onto what we came here to talk about, which is communication, because now, as a community, not only do we have this league system which allows us to have better matches, we have a very important tool that personally I think if this tool was available years ago, the game development of the game would have been ridiculously faster,
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It would have been so much quicker, because now what we have is hard data where the developers can go and look and they can say, well, people are complaining about, for example, Men of the West versus Goblins. So let's have a look. And they can go on Men of the West versus Goblins and they can say, well, we can see that Men of the West are winning, 65% of the games. Maybe that's too high. Let's look at some of these replays. Let's find some players from, the 1800 ELO bracket, the 1700 and the 16 and the 15. Let's get a rank of all these players and let's watch these replays and see exactly what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It gives the developers a great way, using this league tool, to be able to balance the game. But now we have a responsibility, because with that tool, with great power comes great responsibility. We perhaps as a community have a responsibility to think about the way we talk about this game balance and to make sure that we're using words which mean something. We aren't just throwing things out. And I think Andy is probably the best person to talk a little bit about this at the start, because he's come from competitive League of Legends coaching. I think the use of language in those kind of more established competitive games is something we can look at and kind of take something from.
Yeah, for sure. So, if you were, let me preface by describing a scenario that has happened at least 24 times in the last year since I've reconnected with this community. An old player like myself who has a very vivid memory of this game returns to it after years of absence, sometimes up to a decade. For me, it was over a decade of absence. You come back to this game, and it's a new patch, and it's familiar, but it's different. And things happen. And over the course of time, as you're learning, sort of relearning the meta or how to play the game, you come across things that seem absurd to you when you look at it from the lens of how you remember this game functioning in the past. A great example of it, and one that comes up often, is Men of Dale battle wagons, because back in the old days, that was a useless upgrade for the battle wagon. It was terrible. It was worthless. Nobody ever saw it, and the team, the 2.02 team, has made that a usable upgrade in the past. And I'm not familiar with the history or when that came to be, but you come back and you see Men of Dale on a battle wagon, actually useful, and you have never had to deal with this before in your life. And as an old player, with that, as we described in our last episode, that sense of ownership and belonging in this community, it almost feels like some kind of personal insult in a way. Like we subconsciously, we can't help but react that way. And so you go onto a forum or you go into Discord and you say that this is broken. What does that mean? And it functionally, I don't think that people understand what that means. Coming from games like League of Legends or StarCraft, there is terminology that is used and we feel it's sort of like slowly trickling into our community. But I feel like there are tons of terms that we have, like broken, that we use that are very poorly defined, and individuals will use them differently and then get very, very upset when the people that they are trying to have a conversation with don't have the same definition. So what are words? What are some of these words that I'm describing, guys? Broken is one of them. Overpowered, the catch-all.
Overpowered, underpowered, as well.
Yeah.
Worthless or useless is a big one. Like, this unit's useless, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, what do you mean? Not only in terms of what does useless mean, what specific situation are you talking about? What experience have you had here? Because when you say something, and don't forget, we're talking about having a certain ownership over this game and all caring a lot about it, which is why we have these conversations. You're talking to the 2.02 devs who, whether you like it or not, are working on this game for free. They're not making any money to put these patches out. And when you come in and go, KK, shit patch, this unit's fucking worthless. This is worthless. Battle Wagon Men of Dale are broken. They're overpowered. Fix it. They go, I'm not even. They get their backs up, quite rightly, because it's a bit insulting on a personal level to have their work be spoken about like that. And what do these terms mean? What towers is a big one. Battle Wagon Men of Dale is the other that we've spoke about. Okay, they're overpowered, right? People would say that about both. People would agree. Towers are overpowered, and so are Battle Wagon Men of Dale. So are they overpowered in the same way? Do they cost too much money? Is that what you mean? Are they too strong? Did they do too much damage? So you want a damage reduction, okay? So you want damage reduction but the same price. Do they cost too little CP? Well, if you change the damage reduction, how does that change them versus elves or versus goblins or versus these specific matchups? Things that people haven't spoken about. And I think this is part of the big problem, and you see it again and again in the 2.02 Discord. If you go literally onto the patch development, and balanced discussion, you can just see it all the time of like, this is broken, this is worthless, this is broken, fix this. And there's a real lack of understanding not only about the game generally and about things such as like pierce damage or slash damage or hero damage and the mechanics of how the patch works and the computer code that makes things do certain things, but also generally about what those words mean across the community.
Yeah. SeaKnight.
Yes.
What are some terms that get thrown around that you think are misunderstood and that we could maybe hopefully more properly define so as to be useful?
It's definitely the main three. I think it's the main three offenders is definitely like overpowered, broken. Many people don't use underpowered too often, but there is kind of like people also describe like overpowered in kind of descriptive form, like it's too much, or they don't really go into the specifics of why, what would, because someone say it's overpowered, what would be a actual good use? Like you can still say the same statement, this is overpowered, but you have to qualify what that means. It's overpowered, Wildmen
in
are
what situation,
yeah, like let's say Wildmen are overpowered. They very well could be. It's only been like 14 days, 15 days on this patch, and people have varying opinions, but let's say, Wildman's overpowered. Well, why are they overpowered? Well, they have 150. They're one of the very few units that have 20-second build time, which is very fast compared to other units. And most importantly, they have pillage. The way and the context against other factions is that they keep up with other spam units pretty well, and they'll keep gaining money if they send building it. A wall hub takes forever to die, but a Wildman gets one of the largest uses out of killing a wall hub because they just take money out of people's pockets and like, okay, that's overpowered, that's too much. Like, is it though? Is it because of draining the money? Is it because of the 20-second build time, their damage? Is it their accessibility of torches? Like there's, these type of things, defining what overpowered, you can still use overpowered in the same way, but you have to always take another step to define it because it's going to be different for everyone, damage, attack speed, CP, all of that.
All right, so let's try and turn this into find some firm ground to stand on here. So let's use our vast memory of the greatest patch that has ever existed.
Oh,
truly
yes.
Perfect.
Oh my god.
2.01.
The Mona Lisa of game patches. There's a reason they never came and changed it. It's because
because it was perfect.
They looked upon what they created and it was good.
Yes, exactly. Let's go back into history. Let's describe some units and some mechanics from 2.01 that are a lot less ambiguous when it comes to overpowered or broken. Let's start with broken, okay?
Yeah.
So I would define broken as meaning very specifically, this unit does not function as it was clearly designed to function.
Yes, I would agree.
And not only that, no, I should say, and then the context changes depending on the circumstance, okay? Because, language is always going to have that little bit of relativity, okay? So, broken, overpowered, 2.01, very easy. Linden, horse archers. Yep. They did not work. They did not function as intended. Cavalry, when it tramples units, does some damage and then takes damage in return. Linden horse archers on the patch 2.01 did infinite amounts of trample damage, which means that any unit that was trampleable by them was instantly killed, including pikes. That is very clearly not intended by the developers. It's very clearly a bug or an oversight, and it is broken, and it makes that unit far, far too strong. But another thing that you could say is broken and doesn't work as intended are all of the added Rise of the Witch King elite swordsman units like Black Numenorians, Black Orcs, and Half Troll Swordsmen, whose attack speed were so low compared to all other units in the game that they were rendered essentially useless. It was a broken unit because it did not function as intended, and it was truly useless.
Mm-hmm.
Good examples?
I think very good examples, and we have there an example of two broken units. One that is fundamentally overpowered, and one that is underpowered. But both still fall under the same umbrella of broken units for two different reasons.
Exactly.
They do not function as intended, and I think that it's very important to really emphasize here that the term broken is a strong term to be used in gaming and to be used in patch development discussions. If something is broken, it means it is seriously broken. It needs a major rework and isn't working as intended. It's not just, oh, I don't like that because I lost the game. Those dire wolves are broken because they kill my pikes really quick. They're not broken. Dire wolves still work as what they are, which is another type of swordsman.
Yeah. Working as intended. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
It's not a bug, it's a feature. But then,
Yeah.
for me, you know, coming from the games that I played, in not necessarily competitively, but I played a lot of Counter-Strike, and I played a lot of Overwatch. And Counter-Strike was one where the term broken was never really used because it was very well maintained by Valve, and there was a lot of different, there was no real things that didn't work fundamentally as intended. But overpowered and overtuned and underpowered were very commonly discussed. And I think there's a definition to be made there, and I'm going to try and make it. And now, this is from my experiences. I'm not saying this is what overtuned versus overpowered should be, or even is, but this is what I would define it as. Something is overpowered when it requires a vast rework or change. If something is overpowered, it is almost an immediate choice, and strategies work themselves around that particular unit. Okay? So, Linden Horse Archers for Elves were so overpowered they were actually banned by Clan Wars. But if you were to play 2.02 today, and Linden Horse Archers were available as they were in 2.01, you would see every single player make Linden Horse Archers, because it's so broken. They were so overpowered that that's what they would do. They were overpowered and broken, so you'd see the strategy revolve around them. Whereas overtuned and overpowered, you require a big rework. So you require like a back to the drawing board, wait a minute, what values do we have to change here on a relatively large scale? Like not just minor tweaks, but like quite big tweaks and quite a serious patch difference that people would have to almost learn again, that might change the way that faction in Rise of the Witch King plays completely. Whereas overtuned are very specific small changes which don't require like so in Overwatch, for example, something that was overpowered and needed a major rework might be a change of a hero's abilities, might be a literal change of what that hero can do, and an attempt to change the way a hero is played. Whereas overtuned isn't trying to change the way the hero is played, or in Rise of the Witch King, the way a faction is played. It's just trying to change a very specific thing that happens when you play it. So it might be, for example, well, we've made Soldiers of Gondor 10% more resistant to poison damage. That is a unit that's now been tuned, hasn't been majorly changed. So when a unit is overtuned rather than overpowered, it might still be strong, but it just needs slight tweaks. And that's always how I've defined it, but I don't know whether that is necessarily what you guys think coming from different games.
It is. I definitely agree with that, because overtuned is very much like it's simply a numbers thing. You know, if this is a little bit less numbers, the ability would still function relatively the same. It's just the output wouldn't be as efficient, and that's kind of what you kind of look through, because overpowered things are usually strategy defining, strategy defining gameplay elements. So that would be, you know, gameplay will start centering around that unit. Like, I'm going to build so much of this unit and just win off of either pure value, or the opponent cannot react to this unit at all. So if I make a bunch of them, I'm just going to win just simply building this unit.
If I may interrupt slightly,
Yeah.
I think I have the perfect example, again, from the best patch ever made. On 2.01, you might well remember the infamous Mordor Orc Archer spam.
Yep.
Where
the
faction of Mordor would literally build an orc pit, would only build orc pits and resource buildings, and they would build nothing but orc archers, and they would not do anything other than just kill troops and rush fire arrows, and they would literally attack you with all of their spellbook buffs and just orc archers and fire arrows, and that was how they won the game. And it was so domineering and so overpowered that basically every Mordor player played that way, and if you didn't, it was a conscious choice because it was so strong, and it created a very linear gaming experience if you were playing against someone who played Mordor, where they were either known as a Mordor player who didn't, quote, lame because of some sort of arbitrary honor system where it was like, we all understand that these orc archers are too strong, and so we're gonna arbitrarily limit the amount that I build in this game because I'm trying to be polite. Or you would play against somebody and your entire strategy would be like, okay, how do we beat this? And a really awesome specific example of this is Joey's Isengard on 2.01, a unit that was objectively underpowered on the patch, the Isengard Ballista. It just didn't do the amount of damage that it was really supposed to, due to poor coding from the developers. I think it did like Pierce instead of Siege or something very strange. Like, it did lots of AoE Pierce, so it was good against troops, but it's a siege weapon. So yeah. Anyway, but another function of the Ballista is that it had very high Pierce resist and like the Lindens, had infinite trample. And so you would, if you were playing against an unsuspecting Mordor player who's just like, okay, I'm going to build 1,000,000 orc archers, you would just build Ballista with a few orcs as meat shield, and you would just trample them. And he had no idea how to deal with it because he had only learned how to execute this very simple, very overpowered strategy. And with that example, I will yield the floor back to you, Joey.
Yeah. And because, that kind of creates, because what Overpowered does is that it limits other choices, or more specifically, interesting choices to make in a game. Because why would I build something other than Mordor Orc Archers if I could win with the simple building the same unit, make no other decisions, which is unhealthy for a game because you're looking to have fun, and the most enjoyable parts of a game is when the choices that you can make is interesting. It interests the player to make different choices and see them result. If you see other units but the Mordor Orc Archer is going to win, it's like, why would I build anything else if I know this is going to win? Which really reduces the enjoyment, not only for the opponent who's going to fight this really easy strategy, but also the player who's really not going to expand the horizon and get the full depth that a game could offer.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of connect it, like when communicating these terms to the developers and saying things like overpowered or broken, it's very unlikely that a unit is actually broken. It's more likely that a unit is overpowered, but when you say overpowered, please define what that means to you. Like, is it the damage? Is it the ease of execution? These various tools, and is there considerable counterplay that could affect it well, or is the counterplay just not as accessible?
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that what we're trying to ask the community to do and what we're trying to push the community to do here is not stop using these terms which maybe aren't that well defined, and we're not asking them particularly to say, well, stop saying OP because it doesn't mean anything, you need to be blah blah blah. What we're asking is, well, still use the term overpowered. That can be a useful term because people immediately kind of understand what you're trying to say and the slant of the conversation you're going to. but try and qualify it by being as specific as possible. If you're not sure whether to call something overtuned or overpowered, don't not say what you want to say and not put forward your argument. Just try and qualify it as best as possible. That's the important thing. I'm seeing so many people. Towers are overpowered. Please nerf. And then the developer goes, okay, what specifically are you talking about? You couldn't. So what? You couldn't take a tower down? Are you saying that? And specifically speaking, okay, let's talk quickly about towers. You're saying that towers are OP. Do you mean that towers are OP, or do you mean that it's very difficult for your faction to get siege? What are you actually talking about?
Or are you just saying that you're really annoyed with this unit? You know, that's another distinguishing thing that I don't think that people are conscious of when they want to say that this thing is overpowered. Well, is it actually overpowered, or are you just annoyed because you have to change your game plan more than you want to deal with what seems to be a very small thing? But yeah, with towers, go on.
Well, it's with towers. People saying, well, towers are OP. And I think the developers have had a conversation before, like, okay, so what, do you want them to have less health and be easy to be taken down, or do you want them to have to do less damage? Those are small changes. Those are tuning changes. That if you reduce the health from 1500 to 1400, or if you reduce the fire rate of the arrow to be 0.25 of a second slower, or are you talking that what you think when you say towers are OP? Like, one of the thoughts that I've put forward before, not necessarily seriously, but I think it's something worth thinking about, is make it so that towers cannot be garrisoned. You can't make sure that you can't put units in a tower. That is a big change to a unit, to a tower, that will change the way factions play with them, I think. And I think that would be interesting to me. And this was on a previous patch when, elves have been tuned now so that Lurian warriors are more viable. But when people were complaining about elf towers, I was like, well, one answer to that specific gameplay is make it so you can't put any units in towers. And that's quite an interesting thing that will very much change the strategy of all different factions. Now, it doesn't mean it's a good idea, and it doesn't mean the developers think it's a good idea, and the people who actually, when they're going to do it, there's downsides to it, but it'd be something to explore. But I qualified that, and that was the important thing, that people understood when I said towers are OP. My answer was, towers are OP, I'd really like it. Actually, I think this is an interesting idea. What do you think? And people agreed and disagreed, of course.
Yeah. So, how do you have a constructive conversation then? If you think that something really annoys you as a player, how can you have a constructive conversation with people that are putting in hours of their free time and their life in order to keep this game alive and to keep developing this game? Because I think mostly it just comes down to a sense of entitlement, because the game itself is so small and absurd that everyone who plays it, I think on some level, is very deeply attached to it at this point. And so you kind of that sense of your own ownership over the thing sort of takes precedence over, like, oh, that's right, like this avatar on the internet is a human being who also probably has very similar feelings about the game, even though how they enjoy it might be different. Okay, so what do you say, Joey? What's a useful way to try and have a conversation about whether or not towers are overpowered?
So there's a couple of methods that I would suggest if you want to have a serious conversation about balance on a game that people actually balance, because you definitely do not want to lead. Like, our number one thing is you do not lead with like insulting a unit or a patch idea. It's much better to be able to discuss it, or at least give the idea that you are open to discussion about your experiences with the game, or checking what their experience with the game. Like, I've seen, a good startup is always kind of clarifying in a conversation, or what's the other word? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. But a good way is clarifying. Like, it's, I've had this experience. Not this is an example. This isn't me saying I've had an experience, but it's the example of you walk in, you see a developer. Let's go with the towers. But like, you don't want to say towers are OP, they're terribly designed, all these things. what you want to do is, hey, I've had this experience in this game of towers. Either how do I deal with them? And if you think they're too much, you think they're, they take too long to kill or they're too cheap to be made, if the suggestions on how to beat the towers isn't satisfying enough, then you're going to want to lead a conversation where you're like, okay, based upon these feelings, I would like to see these change. But these are the ways where I felt like it was just too much for me to handle. Like, I just, if you say I was going for War Grinders, but one tower, for 400, ate my War Grinders of Howl. I don't think that may actually happen. It might actually. Or you'd be like, it's too close, or a simple unit defending helps with that. It's just like, you're frustrated with the game, but you don't want to bash developers or the design decisions. You're like, hey, I'd like to have this kind of discussion. I felt this experience. Could we see, like, would this be a good idea? What do you guys think about this? And that's when you hopefully engage the other party.
Right. So if you're annoyed with towers, say you're here's a good example that I'm sure people have actually experienced. Say you're playing goblins and you haven't been playing 2.02 for a long time, or maybe you've just come back from a long break. Especially if you're an old player like us, you come back to a game and you play goblins versus elves, and 10 years ago no one built towers because you were just anathema within the community if it was known that you were a multiplayer tower builder. Okay, so you come back to the game and an elf builds a tower and puts a Lorien archer in it on Fords of Eisen and just cuts off the middle of the map, and all you've been doing for 10 minutes is making goblin warriors, and you feel like you're making headway and you're annoying that guy, but now it's like you have to completely change your game plan in order to take down that tower, or you have to tech other units. So say you're frustrated, you go into Discord. Like, a useful conversation to have is, if you're trying to get better, is like, post the replay. I really struggled with this. If this tower felt really, really oppressive, like I couldn't do anything about it once I got up there. And then someone will watch that replay, because we have an awesome community, and they will tell you. And sometimes when you're in that situation, when you're frustrated because you had this gaming experience, or it was like, where you feel like you understand what is happening, and then this game mechanic happens that throws the whole thing out the window, and you get really frustrated. Okay, so a good example in that situation, talking about this, is that a good player may watch that replay and be like, well, that tower was very hard for you to deal with, and you would have had to go to giants in order to defeat it. But really, the problem with this game and why that tower was effective is because you failed at this earlier phase of the game. You didn't put enough pressure on him. He had too much money, and it was too easy for him to get that forward tower up. If you pick your fights better, he wouldn't have been able to do that. And it's sort of, and that can be frustrating as a player to hear, right? Mm-hmm. But it's nevertheless true. But if your goal as a player is like, okay, well, these towers keep coming up irregardless, and it's like, and I understand that I as a player don't have the ability to punish this, but I still see it as a degenerate mechanic in the game that is too easy to abuse. That's a slightly different conversation, right? I find this thing to be very, very annoying, and it's anti-fun, which is a term that has been thrown around once or twice, and I think also deserves to be defined.
Yeah.
Because, so what do you think? Define anti-fun for me, SeaKnightofEa.
And anti-fun is basically, by definition, it'd be like non-fun. It would be the opposite of fun, like very unenjoyable experience. But it also, like, I also think people in context would use that word to say it takes fun away. It doesn't even say it's not any fun. It also takes away from the fun of the game.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I think that's an interesting distinction to make, because there's this idea of like, so when someone says anti-fun, your immediate thought is like something that's incredibly unenjoyable. But I think people in this community use it to say, I was enjoying myself, I was having a 9 out of 10 in the enjoyment, then this guy put a tower up and I was suddenly having a 7 out of 10. That tower is anti-fun. Right. It's like, well, no, you were still enjoying yourself. And I think the way that people approach this game is different, and people enjoy that challenge of the tower. People will kind of enjoy having their gameplay and their meta challenge. Is like, well, you can't just make gold warriors. You have to kind of tech up and use of the units. So I think that for me, something that is anti-fun is something that holds the meta hostage. An anti-fun unit or an anti-fun gameplay is something that you can only do one thing to counter, and to go through the motions of that is not enjoyable in a game with so many options. And
Sure.
that for me, when I was thinking about it, because I think that's an interesting question, because I never really thought about what does anti-fun mean, and straight away I thought of like, it's something that makes me do something with no other option. And it's not the same of like, oh, this guy's made cavalry, I need to make pikes. That's a very slight thing. But it's like, oh, okay, I'm Mordor, this guy's made a tower. My whole gameplay needs to stop, I need to take stock, and I need to make X, Y, and Z unit, and I have to do not only just making one unit, but my entire strategy has to change to deal with this one thing, and then my strategy can change again and become what I want it to play. That, to me, is anti-fun.
Yeah. And just as an aside, I will point out that we are speaking sort of purely hypothetical in this tower conversation, because on 8.4, they actually have been nerfed quite dramatically, and I think that it's safe to say, at least in this lobby, that the opinions are still out on how much the tower nerf has actually, you know, changed the game, if it has at all, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think that that's a pretty useful definition of it. But the problem with something like anti-fun is that, and why your definition is useful, because your definition is specific. But at its core, and the way people will tend to use anti-fun is like, that thing I don't like, and I enjoyed myself less when I saw that. And at that point, it's a meaningless term, right? Because I don't really enjoy it when my opponent builds heroes, because you know, to me, the perfect game of Rise of the Witch King is I build nothing but Goblin warriors, and you build nothing but Lorien warriors, and over time, because my units are slightly faster and I have more of them, I overwhelm you. That is my 10 out of 10 gaming experience fantasy. Okay, so the second you build a Lorien archer, well, this is anti-fun. Fucking developers, fix this shit. These archers are getting in the way of my fun, and you have a duty to make this game fun. What the fuck are you even doing with yourselves if this game is like, you know, so we have to sort of like act with trepidation when we use these strong language, you know, relatively speaking, like anti-fun, you know. But yeah, I think that your definition is really good, but at its core, it's always going to be a little bit arbitrary, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that definition comes specifically from a game like Overwatch, for those of you who aren't aware of it. It's 5 versus 5 hero selection game, and
6v6.
6 versus 6. Sorry, I'm thinking of League of Legends. 6v6 hero selection game. But the reason that anti-fun was kind of used and defined in a way by the competitive, in air quotes, Overwatch community was because there were specific heroes which held the meta hostage. So there were heroes where if someone else selected them, you had to play a certain hero to counter them, and there was no way around it. That hero can only be, it was a hard counter essentially system until that hero went under a rework, and people were like, this isn't fun. I don't want to play this meta every game. I want to be able to switch it up and have more attacking characters or more healers or more tanks or whatever. And it became this thing of like, anti-fun got quickly defined as like, this is anti-fun because if someone selects it, every single other person in the game has to play around them, and they hold the meta hostage.
Yeah. The classic League of Legends example, and it's two sides of the same coin, is like anti-fun in League of Legends was when assassins were so strong that they would just basically one-shot the important characters on the enemy team, and so the entire game is played around where they are on the map and what cooldowns they have available. And on the flip side, it was when the meta would get too tanky and you saw really durable bruisers that no one could kill just sort of like take over the game, and the fast sort of like rapid team fights that people were accustomed to just turned into these grinding slogs where nothing ever really happened, you know. And so a term like anti-fun, I think, inherently will change sort of relative to the community that or the game that you're talking about. But yeah, I I would say that Orc Archer spam on 2.01 was pretty anti-fun, as well as being overpowered.
Absolutely. All of these terms, these are like umbrella terms that go. If something is anti-fun, usually it's overpowered or overtuned, and you use one of these terms to use another, and you're trying to get further and further down this line until eventually you have to qualify all of those statements and come up with your specific reasoning. And I think that's quite important. And I think you touched upon something, Andy, when you were talking then about someone talking to the perfect way to talk about towers, to go into the 2.02 Discord and say, oh, here's my replay. How did I struggled with this? What do I do? And there is something that people, as much as it's a meme or whatever, as much as it's kind of a thing, is people forget that there are other people on the other end of the computer screen, right? So when you're talking to the 2.02 devs, when you're talking to Admiral Excelsior and Braybox and all these other guys who are part of that, I'm not going to say clique, but part of that group who are taking it upon themselves to try and make this game enjoyable for everyone, that's the first thing you need to realize. They are trying. They are not here to stop you from enjoying yourself. The work that they've put in and the hours that they've put in, they love the game just as much, if not more than you do. And you're both trying to achieve the same thing. And I think if people understood that, they would have a better time. But there is a way to go about speaking not only to them in terms of like actually having some respect from talking to someone else on the internet, but also in terms of getting what you want or being able to argue for what you want. And if you want to learn how to talk to people, go and read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, right? Because that'll help you in real life and on the internet. I think you should go and read that if you're really struggling with actually how to talk to someone politely without coming in effing and jeffing and calling everyone, fuck this game's fucking... If you can't even understand how to put something politely, then you failed at the first hurdle. Go and read that book. But then actually discussing and putting your point forward, you're trying to win these guys over, and it's understanding where they're coming from, which I think is an episode we're going to do later on about the design philosophy of 2.02, because there is a design philosophy, there is something that they're trying to achieve, and whether we agree or disagree with their design philosophy, which is essentially they want a refined vanilla experience. They want 2.01 if it was perfect. They don't want it to be a mod. They don't want to be big changes or new units added, new units taken away. They want all the units that were in the original game to be viable. They want all of them to be used pretty much and have a refined vanilla experience, a perfect vanilla experience. If EA had kept supporting the game, this is what we want it to be, whether you agree or disagree. Yeah. But understanding that when you come in and say, remove towers from the game, towers are not going to be removed from the game, guys. It's very unfortunate for some of you to hear that, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. What will happen, though, are changes and tweaks to get them into a good place. So actually coming forward and saying, well, there's no point in me saying, fucking stupid devs, remove towers from the game. We've complained for years and they still aren't removed. When are you going to just delete them? They're never going to delete them. You must understand that. You must come forward and say, okay, they're 500, they take this long. Let's make them longer to build and let's make it so we can't have units in. That's a big change. Just as big as removing them, really. And it's understanding how to actually talk to these developers, not only out of respect for them, but also if you want to if you're bargaining, which is what you're trying to do when you ask for balance changes, right? You're trying to put your argument forward. To win the argument, you have to win people over. You aren't going to win them over by calling them idiots and crap developers when they're working on it for free.
Right. Now, to try and put a bit of a bow on this conversation, which is rambled, we're inherently rambly individuals, at least I am.
Oh, yeah.
I want to pose this question, okay? Which is, if you are playing a video game and there's something about it that's really frustrating, but you still want to play the game, why should you attempt to have a meaningful conversation instead of just ranting and getting and sort of getting something off of your chest, right? Because that experience of just like opening up a post and being like, listen, you fucking shit devs, like there's something inherently cathartic about that on a purely individual level, I must say, even though it's quite rude. But what is the practical argument to our fellow community members to try and speak with a little more discretion and empathy?
What do you think, Joey?
You're gonna have to rephrase the question because I was trying to think about it and then I got lost thinking about it.
Okay, so I think that a reason why you would try and choose your words carefully and with empathy is fundamentally is that if your end goal is you want the game to be good, understand that having useful conversations will meet that end much sooner than just insulting people, basically.
It not only just having the ends meet better, but it also establishes a sort of reliable relationship with developers, and a relationship in the sense that you could be, if you always attempt to have a conversation with thought out reasons why this is good, why this is bad, what you think about. If you do that consistently, there could come a time when a developer hears a complaint from a different player or an experience, and they may even come to you and be like, hey, we've heard these complaints. Have you seen or felt these complaints as well? Or have you seen these balance? Like, what are your thoughts on it? Because they know when you talk and you're able to establish communication or common understanding, that it allows them to more easily gain more data, but it also allows you, the player who wants changes, to feel like you're more appreciated in this community and be able to possibly impact more change on the game that you love.
I think you're both right there. For me, it is important to understand that the size of the community that plays Rise of the Witch King is tiny. We are in our very tiny corner of the internet, and as such, we should practice good housekeeping. We shouldn't shit where we eat. We shouldn't be rude to one another. We shouldn't be blocking people off Game Ranger or whatever, because this community is already so small that to get a good game can be difficult. So we have personally, I think, for people who love the game as much as we do, and the only reason you're playing this game is because you love it. Okay, the only reason you're not playing something with no lag, with better servers, with actual updated support from the original developer and new content released and all that stuff, and a big thriving community, is because you love this game so much. So you should be aware of that and understand that at the end of the day, you're going to run into these people again and again. If you post on the 2.02 patch development Discord, or that 2.02 Discord in general, people will know your name and they'll see you in game and they'll remember you. The developers know who's talking, and they discuss what you're saying, and they know if you're a troublemaker or in that kind of way, or someone who's very rude and comes in swearing and posting all this stuff that isn't constructive. So we should not only do we have what I would say is some kind of moral obligation to have good conversations in this community to try and improve the game, we also have an obligation in this community to try and improve our experiences interpersonally, and to ensure that everyone, when they log on after a hard day of work, listen, you're already playing a game with essentially 750 ping when you're off host. You don't want that experience, which can be not enjoyable, to be exacerbated by the fact that someone is swearing at you in the 2.02 Discord because you said, oh, I don't think that wild men need to be nerfed because of blah blah blah. So I think we have a responsibility to each other, and generally speaking, to the game and to society, to try and be as nice as we can. So that's what I would say.
Well, I would call that gift wrapped. What do you think?
I think so. So I think that's been the episode this week of Boyz Talk Communication 101. Go and install Rise of the Witch King League. The Rise of the Witch King League tool has come with the 8.4 patch, which you should all be playing now. 8.4 is the new patch. It is now available. There are tutorials on YouTube. We might make our own, but the 2.02 official YouTube channel has a great tutorial on there, going through Rise of the Witch King League, through its features and how to set up. And just try and think, next time you get upset about something, well, first of all, what could I have done differently to deal with that? And if you're not happy with that answer, second of all, how do I get this across to people that I'm unhappy with this? And actually just stop and think about it for a couple of minutes and try and formulate an idea. Because when you put something forward to someone else with nothing to qualify it, you're asking them to do that legwork for you, and they might not like it. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. The next one, I think, we're coming hopefully next week. We've got a lot of topics we want to talk about. Revealed random versus unrevealed random. History of 2.01. And I think we want to do potentially another one kind of on Rise of the Witch King League. Maybe a separate little smaller video. Bit of a tutorial from us or something about it. And kind of going through some of the stuff. But I've been the member of the Boyz clan, Brown Bear 55. And go on, guys.
And I'm BlackKnight of
And I'm SeaKnightofEa.
Thanks for listening in. I hope you enjoyed it.